So the Avengers take a massive blow as a result of the Xenomorphs, and Tony Stark is just one of the latest victims. Now, this story is coming out of Aliens vs. Avengers with issue number 3. Now, initially, where this starts out here is yet in another universe, as they say, and yet at another time. And just like in issue number 2, we see the synthetic David 8 and his group standing over the crowd of engineers, as they call them. Now, once again, he sends out this black sludge that ultimately kills everyone. But in this universe, we see opposition, a group of engineers who rush back into their ship or headquarters there, and they suit up in gear. And the gear, in all honesty, kind of resembles a xenomorph, just a little bit, right? Now, as David 8 and his group go down from their ship to investigate the slaughter that they just administered, one of them turns around and gets cracked in the face by an engineer in that suit. Now, the rest of the suited engineers, they take out the rest of David 8's men. Now, this sets up what I think will unfold in the next couple of issues here, because we don't see the specific follow-up on this section right here in this issue. Now, just as a reminder, the engineers who we know created life in this universe, and now they are starting to fight back against the rogue synthetic David 8, who's wiping out his creators and his creators' creators. Now, in the last issue relating to the Avengers, we were reminded that David 8 unleashed his Xenomorphs on Earth. Now, over the past few issues, we saw Bruce Banner, Captain Marvel, Tony Stark, and Miles Morales. They've been the ones protecting Earth's final remnants here in a single city. But when the Xenomorphs broke through their defenses, Tony Stark had a plan. That city was actually a colony ship, and he tried to launch the ship into space. But then Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, showed up unexpectedly with another group of survivors, and seeing that the ship couldn't make it due to the Xenomorphs charging on in, Bruce Banner jumped in to help Captain America, and then unfortunately the team had to leave them behind. So now we catch up on the remaining Avengers here out in space on their ship, now at Mars, which is the home of the Mutant Diaspora. Now, they haven't heard anything from the mutants on the planet, so Captain Marvel is trying not to panic here and suggesting that maybe a solar flare knocked out their communications. But then Tony Stark is skeptical because he's like, listen, in these times, nothing seems simple. Now, another problem emerges here because while they were leaving Earth, the ship sustained some damage, and one of the ship's crews says that the platform mooring collapsed, damaging their expansion drives beyond repair. Now, if they don't want the ship to become a generation ship, something that it's not equipped for, they must borrow some mutant tech in order to be able to replace it. Now, Miles Morales kind of quips here. He's like, well, I guess out of the frying pan into the fire, and they set down there in Mars. Now, Carol and Tony Stark, they were kind of recalling the last time that they came here to this planet, which for Tony was like 20 years ago for some personal reasons, and the Carol mentioned it was like 7 years ago for some business, and how it used to be the busiest spaceport that they've ever seen. Now it's like eerily quiet. So Miles had a bad feeling about this whole thing, which, I mean, who could not have a bad feeling about this, right? Now, Carol and Miles, they get prepared to go check some things out, but Tony insists on coming along. So Miles is like, no offense, bro, but you're like in a chair, my guy, and you're old. You should probably leave the smash and grab to us. So then Tony responds back. He's like, number one, I'm the one that's best to equip to find the technology that we need. And number two, this is not a chair because after all, I am Tony bleeping Stark. He didn't say that last part. I just added that part in there. But then we see Tony transform his chair into an Iron Man suit. And then Carol is like, okay then, like after you, Mr. Stark. Now, before we see where they go, we switch over to Bar Sinister, which is what they call this place here. And surprise, guess who's in there? Mr. Sinister. Or should I say Mr. Sinister's plural, right? So this dude's about to make an announcement. He's like, you know what we have made here, don't you? Like, do you know? And he's like, it's undeniable. It's irrefutable. And then when we look down, we see this dude is working on like not a fully grown xenomorph. And I'm like, what is wrong with this man? And he continues on. He's like, we've spent our entire lives seeking the possible genetic ends of not just what we are, but what we can be. And in this, we finally found our answer. And he mentions how this creature is a starting point of a universal extinction machine, yet a container for the genetic remnants of each host. This is where it gets crazy because we see the bodies here of these mutants that once lived on Mars with xenomorphs, facehuggers attached to their faces. We see Colossus, we see Magic, and there's a few others that's there. And then Sinister continues on. He's like, yes, this is your end, but also your forever, and the perfect representation of everything that we've learned about society. Born in pain, they consume everything, leave only annihilation. Brothers, we must revel in it. Who is with me? And as the Sinisters chant on and on, one of them comes in and then interrupts, and he's like, I got some news. There's a ship that just laid it down. It's massive, it's large. So then Sinister's like, okay, looks like we got some visitors. Now back with the Avengers here, Tony notes that this place is way too quiet right now. So he picks up a heat signature that he mentions that is near the city square. So when they go to investigate, who do they find? Of course, my guy, Mr. Sinister. So Tony's demanding, he's like, yo, where is everyone and what have you done? So Sinister says, normally he's like, I would be offended, but there is definitely no denying these dirty hands, and how for so long that they believed that mutants were the singular dominant species in the solar system, and how wrong they were, and how unforgiving the lesson of extinction is. So then Miles is asking, he's like, are you the only survivor? And then Sinister replies, he's like, I am not. And then Miles presses, he's like, okay, well, where is everyone then? So Sinister teases, he's like, it's interesting that you would ask. Now, meanwhile here at the Avengers Earth colony ship, we see multiple Sinister clones marching aboard. There's a civilian that turns around and is like, oh no, like they're scared of what's coming here. And then one of the clones says, visitors to our humble mutant planet, we come bearing gifts. Do you know what this is? And when they start firing, the things that they're firing off are xenomorphs, my guy. And one of the clones is like, it's a gun, human, a gun that shoots face huggers. And I'm not gonna lie to you, like I laugh pretty hard at this one. Listen, Mr. Sinister is crazy, man. Now, at the same time, Carol and Tony realize a distress call is coming from their ship. So then Tony confronts Sinister. He's like, how could you even do this, my guy? So then Mr. Sinister responds by saying, he did what he always does, which is true, man. He adapts, he overcomes, he conquers evolution, he defeats Darwin. And then we see like these group of xenomorphs coming out the yin yang from everywhere. And we can only assume, right, that these spawn from mutant bodies and that they're about to swarm the Avengers. So then Sinister, he continues his monologue. He's like, I just can't help myself. I always side with winners. Now, of course, I'm wondering, just like you're probably wondering, right? Like, why haven't they attacked Mr. Sinister? Well, that's the question that we're going to answer a little bit later on. So the Xenomorphs, they swarm the Avengers. So Tony wants to push them back to return to the ship. But as Tony tries to give out some orders here, he gets grabbed up by like several Xenomorphs. And then Captain Marvel says, she's like, Tony's in trouble. And then Miles says, okay, I'll go and help him. And he tells Carol, he's like, you get to the ship. But Carol is concerned because he's like, if we split up, they're gonna pick us off. We gotta stay together. But Miles doesn't listen, but it's not on purpose because he had already fired off his webs to rescue Tony. So the Xenomorphs end up pulling him off too. And then he says to Carol, he's like, we'll be right back. So what this does is that it leaves Captain Marvel alone facing the swarm by herself. Now, one Xenomorph spits that acid on her face, and I'm like, oh god, that looks terrible, right? So then she looks up and she sees some light descending down from this, I was about to say heaven, but from the sky. And then she kind of blacks out here for a little. And then we see that it's Emma Frost, the Diamond Queen, with armor right behind her. And then Emma asks a question. She's like, is Carol alive? Like, is she still alive? And then the person says, well, this one's never had 1 ounce of quit in her. And then Captain Marvel, half conscious, recognizes that it's Logan, the Wolverine. And then he says, hang on, Carol, we're gonna get you out of here. So then moments later, she hears these voices talking, and one of them says, well, what about the others? And then another one says, they're gone, we're leaving. And then another voice says, no. And then someone else says, we're leaving again, like they shouted this time. So when Carol like fully wakes up, she sees Manifold, who tells her not to touch her wound, and how he was like, I did the best best that I could, but your face is seriously messed up. So then Carol is like, well, I'm breathing and that's good enough for me. And also, like, where the heck are we and what about the others? So then Emma explains, she's like, we're about 50 clicks here from the spaceport where Carol landed. And she mentions how they glimpsed Spider-Man and Stark before they were overrun. And that was about half an hour after escaping with Carol, and how the Avengers ship that ultimately went up in a fireball, meaning that everyone on that ship is likely Xeno'd by now, right? Like, it's clear that that ship has sailed, pun intended. And then Emma continues, she's like, there's no others. You're looking at the sole human and mutant survivors here on Mars. So then Captain Marvel realizes, she's like, okay, well, what about Mr. Sinister? Like, he's still out there. And she's also wondering, she's like, why the Xenomorphs don't kill him? Like, what's that all about? So then Armor, she kind of shares a theory here. She's like, Sinister probably messed with the genetic code, and how a few days ago she tore one of them in half and discovered that he's carrying an egg in his chest, meaning that Sinister probably messed with the incubation cycle. Now Emma, she's like, that's kind of like a plausible reason, although she does admit that they haven't verified that yet. So in my head, I'm like, hey, Armor and Emma, they got some beef going, you know what I'm saying? So then Carol thanks them for the rescue. She's like, I want to go find out what happened to the others. She really only mentions Tony Stark here. She didn't really mention anything at all about Miles. She just said Tony Stark and the others. Listen, I'm reading between the lines, okay? But Wolverine warns her, he's like, you have no idea what you're facing. And then he continues to mention how they're immune to these Xenomorphs in certain ways. Logan, Armor, Emma, Manifold, Eden, like, they're all good. But when it comes to Carol, she's 100% susceptible to them. So she tries to argue, but Logan says that he recognizes a killing machine when he sees one, being that he's a killing machine himself. So then Carol confesses, like, what's really going on here, right? And how she once vowed to never leave people behind, and how she had to do that about a week ago, escaping from Earth, while the Hulk stayed to fight with Cap. So basically, she's guilt-ridden here and determined not to repeat it. So Wolverine is like, okay, fine. If that's how you feel, then I'll join you then. So then the next day, they explore the wreckage over by the Avenger ship, and they find, of course, that it was destroyed. And they were like, this looks like Xenomorphs, right? That were kind of just like laying outside of that section there. And then they turn and they spot a body that's on the ground, and they realize that it's Tony with a Xenomorph, or what looks like a Xenomorph, had already burst through his chest. So then Carol laments, she's like, oh, Tony, like, you deserve better than this. Like, we all do. There's like a sound. They look up and they see these two ships, and Carol then says, she's like, Wakanda has returned. Now, I'll be honest with you, it's good to see the Black Panther here, or at least Wakanda's presence still out there, because in the very first issues, I should say here, they kind of made it seem like they were gone, like there was nobody else that was there. And from my recollection here, I believe that they were the ones that first alerted Earth that something was coming. Now, personally, I do need more explanation here as to the Sinister thing. Like, how is he not getting killed by these Xenomorphs? Also, I gotta say this, when this dude is not pulling any punches. He killed off Valeria Richards, Captain America, Bruce Banner, and now Tony Stark. Like, who's next, bro? But the reality is that we're gonna have to wait another 3 months for this next installment. Like, they are taking forever to come out with these issues. Now, listen, I would love to know what your theories are here down below in the comments. Also, feel free to join our Discord here, where you can continue the conversation there as well. The link is gonna be in the description for more discussions about other things as well. Also, in the description is gonna be a link to our Patreon. If you would like to support us, it definitely helps us when it comes to creating more videos here. There are some perks that are there as well, like voting on future topics that we cover, shout outs, exclusive Discord sections, chances to join our live streams, giveaways, and more. I appreciate you watching. Thank you as always for kicking it with Keepin' It Comic. Bye.